Welcome to East Alabama Today, featuring topics, events, and interesting people from all over East Alabama. Hosted by Carl Brady. Now, let's get right to the show. Here's Carl Brady.
And we welcome you into East Alabama Today. I'm Carl Brady. Thanks so much for being with us on today's program. As always, we're going to start you off with a little contact information and let you know how you can get in touch with me. If you have an idea for the program, you know we'd love to hear from you. We cover our base coverage area, the 9 counties of East Alabama, and we're always looking for things that are going on that we can talk about here on the show. Fairs, festivals, special events, things like that. So let me know about those things that are happening in your community by sending me an email, cbrady@tv24.tv. That's cbrady@tv24.tv. Fairs, festivals, special events, things that are going on in your community with your church, your civic club or organization, all of those kind of things we want to know about so we can possibly put them on the show here on East Alabama Today. Now, you know as well, we're always looking for interesting people in the community, writers, musicians, artists, people who have odd or interesting hobbies, and you think they'd be a great guest for the show. Let me know about those folks as well. Again, the email address is cbrady@tv24.tv. So we look forward to hearing from you about the things happening in your community. We'll be back in just a moment with today's edition of East Alabama Today. Stay with us. Welcome back into East Alabama Today. Again, I'm Carl Brady. Thanks for being with us on the program today. We have a couple of special guests with us, and we're going to be talking about a new book that you can get, and it is the biography of Glen Browder. And we'll tell you all about Glen and some of the things in the book as we go through the show today. But let me introduce our guest. We have Geni with us. Geni, welcome to the program. Good to see you.
Thank you, Carl.
Geni, the author of this biography about Glen Browder, and of course the subject of the book. Glen Browder is here as well.
Good
Glen,
to be back, Carl.
Great to have you on the program. You've written a lot of books yourself, but this first time that you've been the subject of a book here?
Yes, I've written about other people, and I've had a lot of people write about me in the news media. Mm-hmm. But it's a little different when you're looking. There's your biography. You're being scrutinized like you've scrutinized other people.
Right. Well, Geni, as the author of the book, kind of give us a little background on you. People will recognize your name as an editor with the Anniston Star for a long time. You worked for the Talladega Daily Home, but give us a little bit of your background that led you up to the point of writing this book.
All right. Well, I was a career journalist and was out of state for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. Came back to Alabama in 1993, and at that time, Dr. Browder was already in Congress, and when I joined the staff of the Anniston Star, so he was my representative in the 3rd District, and was very well thought of in the newsroom. I think probably not only because of the policies that he was following in Congress, but because he was so accessible. Mm-hmm. So as a working editor, I was able to have quite a bit of contact with him, and everything I learned about him added to my respect. So when the opportunity came in, I think 2006, 2005, to write his biography and begin researching his life and his career, it seemed like a great opportunity for me. And I, by that time, had been at the Star long enough and covering Alabama politics as an editor, mm-hmm. To the extent that I was satisfied that this was a worthwhile endeavor.
Well, absolutely, and Glen, for people who don't know who Glen Browder is, of course, most everybody in the state of Alabama has heard the name at some point in time over the last few decades. But Glen, you are Professor Emeritus of American Democracy at Jacksonville State. So
yes, and a long-time professor.
A long-time professor at Jacksonville State. So lots and lots of people have come through your classroom at JSU. You've also served as a United States Congressman from this area. You were the Secretary of State of Alabama for a while, and also served as a state legislator. How did you end up doing all that? What was the impetus and the drive?
I was a political scientist. I taught political science, so I think it was just a natural progression to where, having taught it for so many years, I decided, well, I'd like to try it myself. And it was very interesting, a great learning experience. It was another educational experience for me to go into the Alabama legislature and then Secretary of State in the U.S. Congress. Frankly, Carl, I would have paid, rather than taking a salary, I would have paid as a political scientist to participate in those bodies.
How has that affected the way you teach democracy and political science at JSU now that you've actually had this personal hands-on experience?
Well, I think it gives me something extra, but I don't teach my politics. I try to make sure that I'm first and foremost an academic, a political science professor. So I try to teach what I taught before. I just bring in the practical side of it to illustrate the political science principles. And they do work very well. A lot of people say what you teach in the classroom doesn't apply to real life. Well, it does.
In a lot of cases it does.
Yes, it does.
And I think one of the mistaken concepts of political science is people have a tendency sometimes to think you are teaching Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians and stuff, but the study of political science is the study of the process, of the democratic process, which I find fascinating with the way it works and the way it's supposed to work and how we apply those principles.
I would add that being a political science professor doesn't mean I had all the answers, but it does give you some advanced insights about the kinds of questions you're going to run into, and gives you something extra when you do actually get into the political arena.
Geni, how did the book come about? What was the impetus behind putting this together?
Probably not in the usual way. In the newsroom at the Star, we had a lot of contact with different people at JSU, and word got back to me that there was a biography to be written about Glen Browder, and I thought I could do that. I'd be interested in doing that. And so I called Glen, and at that time he already had arranged with somebody else to do this, and that agreement fell through. I think it was later the same day that he called me back and we had our first meeting. Now, we had met on several occasions before, but we really didn't know each other very well, so that first meeting was feeling each other out to try to get a sense of whether we could work together on so intensely on such a project. And it went very well. Glen's wife Becky came in and I clicked with her immediately. So we met many times after that, many hours of interviews. I took his class in the Future of American Democracy. And I wish that class was still being taught because I think it was an important class. I interviewed, I think the list grew to 38 people, different former students, colleagues in Montgomery and in Washington, other political scientists, and many hours of poring over his collection of papers. He kept documents from every office that he ever held, and it was a very complete record. And also, the news accounts I found were extremely helpful. A lot of the names I already knew because they were my colleagues, and I was very pleased to see in my research what a good job they had done. They almost always got it right, and if they didn't get the whole story the first time, there was almost always a follow-up.
Carl, an interesting aspect of that, from my perspective, I knew that Geni was talking to these other people. So as I gave her my version of my life and political issues and incidents of the past, I knew that not only was she paying attention to me, but she was talking to dozens of other people. Some of my colleagues in Washington and in Montgomery, she was talking to those people.
Right.
And also she was looking at news media accounts. So I always wondered when I was talking with her, well, now what is she going to find out? They tell her different from what I tell her.
Right. Is their version going to be different from the way you remembered or saw things?
Right.
Had you taken on a challenge this big before? Had you done other books and other long-term things like this before?
I had taken on equivalent challenges, but I had not written a book before. I was the primary editor in charge of starting the Consolidated Publishing websites, and I did that for 6 years. Was my last almost last assignment at the Anniston Star, and I'd say that was as big a project and took about as much time.
Right.
And was about equally successful, I think.
How long did it take from starting the process to the book is in print and ready for the public?
5 years, I think.
Wow.
Now, all of that was not in writing and research. The first 2 years were the writing and research, or the research. The next year was writing, and then it took a couple of years to get it into print.
How do you take such a storied career and narrow it down? I'm sure there's a lot of things you had. As a video editor with shows and things like that, I find, and even writing news stories myself, I find that I'm limited by time and space. So I always end up having to leave something out that I wish I didn't have to leave out. So how much of a challenge was that after researching such a storied career?
That was the biggest challenge. Glen did not direct my research, but he, on numerous occasions, directed me to get out of the weeds. A lot of this book talks, you were shoulder to shoulder and side by side with some of the biggest names in politics on the local, state, and national level during some very important times in our country. Just expand on that a little bit and some of those personalities and people that are in the book.
That's an interesting point you raised, Carl, because I was not a prominent enough political scientist to merit a biography. I was not a prominent enough politician to merit a biography. But I did come along at some interesting times in Alabama and in Washington. Sometimes people ask me about who was the best politician I've ever dealt with. People automatically think I will say George Wallace. But I did not know George Wallace, the politician. I served in the Alabama legislature during George Wallace's last term when he was a different person. And he was thinking about his role in history. But I would not say George Wallace because I just didn't work with him. Interestingly, it's State Senator John Teague, who is probably the best politician that I ever worked with. He was a state senator from Childersburg, and he taught me a lot about politics, and he was an excellent politician. In Washington, it was Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton is a remarkable politician. He knows how to relate to you as an individual, and he knows how to talk to a group. So I would say nationally it's Bill Clinton.
We need to take a break and do a commercial here, so we'll do that and be back in just a moment and continue talking about Professor Politician, the biography of Alabama Congressman Glen Browder. We'll do that when we come back. Stay with us. And we welcome you back into East Alabama. Today we are talking about the book Professor Politician, the biography of Alabama Congressman Glen Browder. Geni Certain here is our guest as the author and researcher on this book. And of course, Glen Browder is with us as well. And as we talk about the political scene, one of the things you guys wanted to bring out in the book, and it is as much a history lesson as it is a biography, because there's so many different things covered in the book. But one of the things you guys wanted to point out is, even though we kind of as the public have a bad taste in our mouth for politics and politicians, it's not all dirty politics behind the scenes.
We really wanted to demonstrate through one man's life in public service that government can work, despite the partisan divide that was very strong and prominent in the mid-90s when Dr. Browder was in Congress, and seems even more prominent now. It can work. But it takes people like this who are willing to compromise, who are willing to seek a solution and not just fight.
Common sense. There's people have a tendency now to say there's a lack of common sense.
Common sense and a willingness,
and
a willingness to work with the other side. It's not all a feel-good book about making democracy work. Right. There's enough politics in this book, threats, bribes, dealing with George Wallace, dealing with Bill Clinton, to be interesting. Mm-hmm. But there's a civic message that you can make. Politics does not have to be dirty, and it does not have to be destructive. Mm-hmm. It can. Politics and government can work if you get your head on straight and you're willing to work with the other side.
Do you really have to? We hear so many stories of everybody looking out specifically for their district, but that's a fine balance, because you're not just responsible for your district, you're responsible for the whole. As a state senator or in the state legislature, you've got to look out for your district, but you also have to look out for the state as a whole. And as a U.S. congressman, you have to look out for your district, but as for the country as a whole. How do you balance that out in the political game to make that work for everybody?
It's very difficult, and you have to do it consciously. It just doesn't happen naturally. Mm-hmm. You have to do it consciously. As a matter of fact, the title of the book, Professor Politician, mm-hmm. is a play on Plato, one of the classic works, mm-hmm. Plato's Republic, in which he said it would be good if we had kings who were also philosophers. Mm-hmm. In other words, they had the power mm-hmm. and the wisdom. Well, I knew I couldn't be a king, and I knew I didn't imagine myself as a philosopher, but I did, early in my career, picture myself as a professor politician, mm-hmm. a play on philosopher, king, and I purposely tried to design my career to where I would try to balance these things out. Mm-hmm. Look out for the people that are represented, and sometimes that meant doing what I didn't want, or sometimes that meant what my national associations, my party or my mm-hmm. country thought was best. And then at other times, you had to decide, I think the national interest is more important than my local interest. So it requires a balance, and that balance doesn't come naturally. You have to work at it.
Interesting question. You as an academic, as a professor, in all that you've seen in politics, what careers best prepare someone to be a politician? For young people who are watching, you got a lot of lawyers that are politicians, you have doctors that are politicians, you have educators that are politicians, which there's some things going on in the state right now that's trying to, maybe question whether educators are allowed to be politicians. And so what kind of a career choice makes for the best politicians, or does it just come down to a personal thing?
I think it's personal. I would not specify that you have to have a political science degree or you have to be a lawyer. Mm-hmm. I think the main thing is, first, and I'm going to get my civic pitch in here, first is that you commit yourself to making American democracy work mm-hmm. as well as possible. But once you do that, I recommend that you just do all you can to learn about American society, mm-hmm. whether that's as a business person, a lawyer, an educator, a law enforcement person. Mm-hmm. Do all you can to make yourself knowledgeable about America and American society, and of course your local area, mm-hmm. so that when you come to the U.S. Congress, you're not representing the lawyers or the educators, you're representing everybody, and you're trying to make that process whereby everybody has to come together and work together. Mm-hmm. So I would not designate any preparation other than getting your heads on straight about American democracy. Yeah. And learning something about the American system.
And service. You talk about the civic side of it. Service. I think you have to be willing not to do this in a self-serving way, but you really have a desire to serve other people.
Yes, and understand, as I said, not only try to pursue the civic purpose, but understand the role of ego that all of us are. All of us have egos, right. And all of us are interested in our own personal situation. But again, that comes back into the need for balance.
Mm-hmm. Geni, as you did all this research and all this writing, what were some of the things that maybe caught you off guard, or that you discovered that you didn't expect to discover? You said you said earlier that you found out that in reading all the news stories and following up that the reporters were getting it right. They were portraying him accurately in their news stories. What were some of the other things like that you found?
Well, Glen is a lifelong Democrat, and I equated that with lifelong liberal, and Glen was not nearly as liberal as I expected him to be. I think one of the things that surprised and pleased me about writing the book was that it was not all politics. As fascinating as I found the politics and the maneuvering and the relationships, it was the history of his personal history as a young person, how he came to Alabama and then came to get into politics, and that's the first 3 chapters of the book. But I also really enjoyed, you were talking about service of a politician in a kind of a generic way, but Glen's service in ways that he called extracurricular activities. Those were the things that I was most familiar with, having been in Anniston and Calhoun County and Talladega County, covering at the newspaper news events like the tornado at Spring Garden north of Piedmont. When it was out of his district, he just happened to be there, came out of church that Sunday and headed straight up to the church that was destroyed. Dealing with the media influx and the horrible feelings that arose in Wedowee when they had a conflict over whether or not biracial couples could attend their prom. There was a rash of church burnings across the South, not just in Alabama, during that time. And Glen stepped in and organized with some of his colleagues in Congress a way to address that, to calm the tension. And as he explained to me, it was not necessarily a function of being in Congress, but he had a leadership role that he was able to play that other people could not, and he felt like it was part of his civic duty to do that. There's enough politics in the book for any political wonk to be satisfied, but also there's a lot of history of the state and particularly this area. Go ahead.
What was your favorite part of this whole process? As you were doing the research, as you were doing the writing, what part did you look forward to the most whenever you were going to sit down and work on it?
The part that I enjoyed the most was also the part that I dreaded the most. And that was actually talking to the individual people. As a journalist, you expect that I would talk to people all the time and be comfortable doing that, but I'm actually quite a shy person, and I'd have to steel myself to make these interviews. But once I did, the people were fascinating. They had fascinating stories of their own, but they always had anecdotes that they wanted to tell. They had a different perspective on a question that I was asking, and it became even more clear that everybody has a story, and if you will listen to it.
That's awesome. Before we go, because we're slowly running out of time, or quickly running out of time, you guys recently went to Montgomery for a special honor from the legislature.
Yes, we did. Glen Browder, the state legislator from my district, who has a seat that I once had, along with some of his colleagues, sponsored a resolution of commendation that he presented to me while I was in Montgomery. We were in Montgomery for some book events. And had a very nice time down there. Saw a lot of friends and sold some books. But he had a resolution in the Alabama legislature honoring me, and that was special.
Wonderful. I bet it was. We need to take another commercial break. We'll do that right now. When we come back, we'll talk just a little bit about how you can get the book and get a copy of it for yourself. So stay with us. We'll be back to wrap up in a moment. And welcome back for our final segment of East Alabama Today. We've been talking about the book, Professor, Politician, the biography of Alabama Congressman Glen Browder. And Geni, what's the best way for everybody to get a copy of this book? And I think you'll really want to do that.
Right. It's available from New South Books in Montgomery, and that's their website. You can also order it online from Amazon and other online booksellers. It's at the JSU bookstore, and it's also at the museum store in Montgomery.
Okay, so several different ways that you can get a copy of the book for yourself, and of course keep an eye out as well for book signing events at local bookstores. You'll both be out and signing and autographing books and selling books and those kind of things as well. But the best way to learn more about it is the website newsouthbooks.com. Well, it's time for us to go. Geni, thank you so much for being with us. It's been a pleasure. Glen, always good to see you. You're welcome to come back and talk politics with us anytime.
It's always fun.
And folks, we thank you for joining us as well here on East Alabama Today. Hope you have a great day, and we'll see you again next time.